our work. We've learned so much throughout the week. Now it's time that we make sure that we remain consistent.
So, first of all, I have a cold from before I came to the camp, so forgive me. It's hard. I'm not so loud in the first place, so and with the cold it's harder. So I hope in the back you guys can hear me. So remaining consistent in our work. What I want to, I guess, focus on is what I think is the focus, so to speak, and to give some thoughts around it. So basically what I want you to remember is the following set of phrases. So, learn, grow, give, together as worship. Learn, grow, give, together as worship. Okay? This is what we need to remember. If you want to stay consistent, you have this as the measuring stick by which to look at how we live our lives. Essentially what this is that there's components to our development which must be constantly invested into, and sometimes certain individuals may have a leaning to one or other of those components, but all of the components are important for one to have a balanced and healthy journey towards Allah. Those components then, they're learn, grow, give, and then we do that together, meaning all of that process of dealing with those things has to happen in a collective of people who are generally moving in the same direction. And then the final point is that it has to be worship. The overarching spirit of all of those activities has to be that those are being done as a means to come closer to Allah. He had asked if I wanted to stand or sit. I always choose sit because I'm very sedentary, but I can't see some people in the back, so I'm sure that makes it easy for you to listen. So, we'll start one by one. First point is learn. So if we look at the first revelation of the Prophet ﷺ that we touched upon briefly in Jamaal, the first revelation is to the Prophet, I should say, is Iqra, right? Read, learn. And what's interesting about this is that you're learning in the name of Allah, in the name of your Lord. Iqra bismi rabbik. And so, what this needs from each of us, how do we stay consistent? First foundation is to learn. The learning has to happen in multiple places and always. It's a culture, really. You know, if you look at the history of Islam, there's always an emphasis on seeking knowledge. Is it because you have to? Is it because knowledge is going to necessarily get you to paradise in and of itself? No. Is it because you're going to automatically become better because you seek knowledge? No, it's not the case. But that knowledge is actually the foundation, so that we at least know how we can worship Allah, and also so that we can come to a deeper and more nuanced and sophisticated understanding of our relationship with Allah over time, and also how we can serve people. All of it is related to learning. Also, part of this is that learning it has tarbiyah components built into it. That if you are constantly learning, then you are constantly acknowledging the limitations of what you know. If you're constantly learning, you're constantly putting yourself in a position of humility in front of others. If you're constantly learning, you're constantly actually also in a state of dhikr. because you're going to be learning that which is helping you to come closer to Allah. Now this has multiple components, right? We could talk about learning in the side of Islamic studies, talk about learning in general. So obviously we have to do both. When we talk about learning, when we're talking about Islamic studies, then really what people should be focusing on is building a foundation of understanding in Islam so that they feel like they're on firm ground. You should be able to feel like you're comfortable in your faith. You're able to answer basic questions, that you know why you make wudu, what are the conditions for wudu, you know how to pray, what do you do if you make a mistake in prayer, what do you do if you're traveling, when are you traveling, when are you not, all these basic things of worship, we should know these things. And this is part of it. But also specifically, I'm going to give very particular advices. So the first one is that people build a relationship with the Quran such that it is part of their lives and such that they can draw their own personal benefit from it depending on the stage that they're at. So the way that a scholar reads the Quran is going to be different than the way that a 12-year-old reads the Quran, for example. But that doesn't mean that the Quran doesn't have something to offer to each. So what the first issue is to know and have a relationship with the Book of Allah such that it nourishes your life. You want to be like what one of the brothers was telling me. He had a friend who anytime he would see this person, they would always have a mushaf with them. And it was actually a translation. It's an English translation. They would have it with them all the time. He's like, I saw this person always reading the Quran, always reading the Quran. To the point that any conversation you have with them, at any time, they can bring verses from the Quran. So this is the kind of relationship we want to have with it. He said, then the brother got really interested in group polemics. This group and that group and why this one is right and why this one is wrong and all of these things. He said, and every conversation after that was all about who's right and who's wrong. He said, one time I looked at the brother, I told him, man, you remember when I used to talk to you? And every time we had a conversation, you used to be able to quote from verses in the Quran. He's like, you don't do that anymore. So the guy broke down crying on the spot because he remembered. He remembered like, wow, that's how it was, and then I got into all this other stuff. So the first, most foundational issue for us in our personal lives, in our relationship with Allah, is to have this relationship with the Quran. Okay. Number two is to have a good working knowledge of the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ. The life of the Prophet ﷺ is basically the backdrop of the Quran. So they actually go very closely hand in hand. You can't really. It's going to be difficult to have a good relationship with the Quran without having a good understanding of the seerah. The seerah is like the background that it's all being revealed on. You understand the context, you understand the situations. You get the Prophet ﷺ, his part of his job is to teach them in kitab and hikmah, right? Hikmah is actually the sunnah, the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ. He himself was wisdom. So in understanding the Prophet's life and knowing it, you have a well that you can always draw from. So how do you maintain consistency? You have these foundations that are always there. The Book of Allah is always there. The Sunnah, the Seerah of the Prophet ﷺ is always there. You can draw from it when you need it, inshallah. So this is number two. Outside of that, these are the most foundational things. Outside of that, it's good for people who are, especially if they're going to be in the service of Islam, calling others to Islam and stuff like that, should get a basic knowledge of general Islamic sciences. There's any number of ways you can do that, but I would recommend a couple things. The first is to do so with structure. So don't just pick up random books and read them because they sound cool. Or I should be more correct. Don't just pick up random books and read 15 pages of them because they sound cool before you go to the next one. But actually have some structure in the way that the study happens. One good way to do this for people who are local here or not local is through College of Islamic Studies, IIOC, Omar Farouk Masjid in Orange County. Imam Mustafa has a 2-year program there. You can do it online or on-site, covers the basic Islamic studies curriculum. And it doesn't waste time in things that you just really are not so practical. So for example, when you normally study purification in fiqh, one of the issues in purification is how do you clean a well if an animal of a small size falls into it or if an animal of a medium size falls into it, or if a larger animal falls into it, what do? Is the well completely contaminated? Can you clean it or not? If you made wudu with that well and then you realize that an animal fell in it yesterday, do you have to repeat those prayers? All of this stuff is actually in the books of fiqh normally. That's all not in his curriculum, because most of us are not dealing with wells. But in his book, for example, you have the question of, how do you pray on a plane? Or can you carry a phone that has an app of Quran in it into the bathroom? You know, like these kind of things. So it covers the basics, it also covers some other things, and it gives you a good breadth of the sciences. But in general, you need to know basically what you believe about Allah.
What's the name of the university you said?
College of Islamic Studies. So it's collegeislam.com. Collegeislam.com. And this masjid also, may Allah reward them, they're different than a lot of masajid. They actually lose money on each of these courses. Consciously. They consciously lose money on the college. So the college is, again, it's a 2-year program. The courses, each class, I think 15 weeks. Where is my wife? She's teaching one next week, I think. I think they're 15 weeks. And the class is $50. So it's really low barrier of entry. It's really cheap. Imam Mustafa actually wanted to charge more. And the board of the masjid was like, no, we don't want it to be a barrier for people to take the classes. We're gonna, if we lose money, we lose money. So it's a good program. Some of these books he's been, like the 5th book, he wrote it over 7 or 8 years. It's not something that just came together. So that's one of them. In that you'll cover the basics, like what do we say about Allah, what do we know about Allah, why does He exist, what do you say to certain arguments against the existence of God, you know, how do you, what are the basics of fiqh that you need to know, all these type of things. So that's number 1. Number 2 is that you learn from people who have some qualification in their learning. So who do you learn from? You learn from people who have 2 things. They have some qualification in their learning, and they're ethically upright people. Fortunately, it's not always easy to find the 2. So when it comes to the learning, this is a little bit complicated as well, because traditionally in Islamic studies that didn't mean degrees. Someone could be very well studied in Islam and they don't have a degree in Islam. Someone else can have a degree but they really don't know what they're talking about. So for example, I went to Al-Azhar. Probably a good chunk of the people in my class that graduated don't really know what they're talking about. It's true. You take an exam, you memorize it, you answer the question. But there's a good chunk on top that they really know what they're talking about. Right? So you have to figure out who those people are. So that they know what they're talking about, that they're not kind of making you hate other Muslims, that they're not overly polemical in their approach, that they actually encourage you to think for yourself while acknowledging the limits of your abilities. You know, these kind of things you look for in a teacher. The second thing is that they have to be ethical. So don't learn from someone just because it seems like they know a lot, but when you watch them in their own personal behavior, they're not someone that you want to actually be around. I saw this actually, I would say like my first teacher in Islam was probably Imam Taha in San Diego. And I'll give you a couple examples of what I mean. Like one time, we were in the masjid and Sheikh Taha's daughter, Sheikh Taha lives in the masjid, right? San Diego people. His apartment is in the masjid. And we were in the office of the masjid one time and his daughter was there and she was working on like a school project or something. And she said, Bobby, can I have like the stapler? In the masjid office, right? So he said, don't you have a stapler upstairs? Very nicely. You have a stapler upstairs, right? And she's like, yeah. And he's like, then go upstairs and use our stapler. You see like how detailed this point is? If you're going to use a stapler for your own personal work project, then you should go use the one from our house, not the one that's in the masjid office by people's donations. Right? Another one was Sheikh Taha in his office. He has like or at least he used to have a picture of the universe on the wall. So one time I used, like, you know, one of those National Geographic type things. So one time we're in there and he says, you know what, do you know why I put this here? And I said, why? He's like, so I can remember where I am in this whole thing. Like, that is the universe. and this is Taha. So it's really, people who you can learn more than just knowledge from them. It's very important. This is the way of learning historically in Islam as well. You don't just learn from people for knowledge. You learn from them also for how they live. The third thing in learning is just read. Get in the habit of reading. Read a lot. When you build the knowledge of people that you're studying with, it gives you the ability then to read more things and understand them properly, get a knowledge of them. You can read things that you're not necessarily going to understand. That's okay. Right? Like I've read books before where I read it and I'm thinking to myself, I can understand about 35% of what's being said right now. But that 35% I can understand, the other 65 I'm going to leave gray for now. And maybe like 6 months when I come back and I read this book again, I'm going to hit 65%. And 35% is going to be gray. And then like another year later, maybe the book will make sense. But the ideas are kind of sitting back there, and you haven't drawn conclusions off them. You're just opening your mind to different realms of discussion. One of the things that I loved about an Azhar was that you get everyone's opinion. It's not like, oh, the 3 schools said this, so then the person says there's consensus. Or it's not even the 4 madhab say this, so there's consensus. In Azhar, you never get that. It's like, we had issues in economics where it said, literally, there's 8 opinions on this issue. And tell you every single one, and why they said it, and so on and so forth. So what happens, you get exposed to different ideas, you broaden your scope. This can be very important. One thing that I've seen from almost every single Muslim organization that I've dealt with so far, is that they're all extremely limited in their scope, because they only deal with themselves. So I've seen this with mass people, I've seen this with the Sufi people, I've seen this with the Salafi people, I've seen this with everyone. Is that I only deal with my own people, so the only ideas that I'm familiar with are my own people. And that's a big failure when it comes to a person's ability to make da'wah, to deal with others, and so on. So portion number 1 is learn. Any questions on this before we proceed? Yes.
As far as the Sira goes, do you have any recommendations on titles?
Yes.
Or good books?
Yes. Big, small, medium.
Whatever is good.
Okay. Yeah.
Small.
Small.
Let's be realistic.
Yeah. The easiest one that's small is Imam Mustafa's book that I mentioned before, Mustafa Omar. He has a book, it's literally like 40, 50 pages or something. It's really small. You can read it very quickly. But it's nice. Sometimes it's nice to read something that's very quick, and then you can read something that's a little bit bigger afterwards. And because the thing is, it's almost like, wow, now it all makes sense. Think about learning sometimes like a 3D printer. You know, like how 3D printers do things? Like you put the first layer, you put the next layer, you put the next layer, you put the next layer. 3D printers are amazing, by the way. This concept that you can like print. Anyways. So they do layers and layers and layers and layers and layers until you get the product. So a lot of times when you're reading, you're just putting the first layer down, you put the next layer down, you put the next layer down. So put the first layer down with the easy book, and then after that, then another easier book is Tariq Ramadan's book, In the Footsteps of the Prophet. It's very good for a number of reasons. One of them is that it's actually written in English initially, like it's not translated into English. Another one is that he writes in context. So you don't have to, sometimes when you read older books, you kind of have to, you come across something and you're like, well, that one I need to adjust. You don't really need to adjust a whole lot when you read his book because it's already all in context. So this is also good. The third standard one after that people usually recommend is the Sealed Nectar. Sealed Nectar is very good, it's just extremely dry. So it's a later kind of text. Martin Ling's is really good. Muhammad, it's just called Muhammad. Very beautifully written, and it gives you also like, he does a nice job of weaving in stories of companions into the seerah. So it's not only the seerah, you get some of that as well. And then the next, Muhammad. Yeah, Martin Ling's. And the last one is Muhammad, Man and Messenger by Abdul Salah. It's bigger.
What was it?
Muhammad, Man and Messenger. Abdul Salah. Yeah.
Does also suggest a part of my book?
Hamza Yusuf has a really nice audio that
Yeah.
he was far away down here in California, but it was a really nice set that he did, and it goes through the as well. So.
Yeah, Sheikh Hamza's commentary on the Sirah is based off of Martin Lings' book. So it's, if you prefer audio, it's quite good. Yes. Adil Salahi. Adilsalaahi. He's also the one who translated Fi Dilan al-Quran that we were talking about, in the shade of the Quran. He translated that as well. He's a really good writer. Any other questions on learning? Yes, Sheikh.
what I have يعني المقرأ كثير وما يعني الفائدة من
It's coming in number 2. Inshallah. Yes.
It might be something you discuss later, but how to balance like this type of learning with like for some of us who are in college, you know, with your regular studies, like how much do you mix that in?
Okay, good. You reminded me of the part that I almost forgot. Okay, so number 2 in learning is secular knowledge, right? Secular knowledge. Which is to say that I think that there are certain things that as people who are trying to guide others to faith that we should at least be generally aware of, regardless of our area of expertise. And then area of expertise is a secondary discussion. But we should generally be aware of, like, for example, I remember one khatib, he said something I thought was amazing. He said every Muslim should know 3 histories. They should know the history of the Prophet ﷺ and his companions, like the first generations of Muslims. So they should know the history of where their parents came from. And they should know the history of the country that they live in. And I thought that that was really profound, you know. So, but part of what I'm trying to say is we should all have some general grasp on history, especially where we're living. We don't have an understanding of like civil rights movement, black power movement, different things that have gone on in the United States over the last, it's a short history. You don't have to, it's not like Cairo. It's only a couple hundred years that you really have to worry about. So that's one of them. To have like a general understanding of politics, current events, stuff like that, is very important. General touch on philosophy. Like basically if you pay attention in high school, you should be okay. The problem is most of us didn't pay attention. So these things are there, right? But I think also whatever field you're in, you should excel in that field. So to tie into what you're saying, Rashad, whatever your field of study is, you need to do well. It's not like I'm just going to go to college and I'm going to barely get by because I'm doing MSA and I'm reading these books on Islam on the side. And I don't have time. You know the truth of that argument. But that's not the way it works. Okay, so there has to be a large emphasis placed on what your profession is, what your field of specialization is. Because we're supposed to excel in that. Yes, it should be balanced in the sense that you should, depending on what level the person's at, they have varying balance. Like if you really don't know anything about how to pray and these basic things, you might need to put a little bit more time into it initially, but it's going to weigh itself out. But nonetheless, I mean, the absolute minimum thought that you need to know doesn't take a whole lot of time. And after that, really going to school is fun, you know, in the sense that you're paying for that education, you shouldn't waste the money. So spending time on that, like specializing in these, whatever you're in, is very important. All of this, in the end of the day, the closing point on learning is that learning is actually an act of tawheed in many ways. That if we understand what tawheed actually is and means, then we should be interested in learning across the board. Because أَلَا فِي كُلِّ شَيْءٍ لَهُ آيَةٌ تَدُلُّ عَلَى أَنَّهُ الْوَاحِدُ. You know, that in everything that exists, there's a sign that He is one. So whatever field of study you're in, it should all be leading us back to Allah. And so therefore it should actually be interesting. I would say when I was less mature in my understanding of Islam, I got out of organic chemistry and I got into third world studies. Right? Alhamdulillah, I'm very happy with that decision. But later on I realized that organic chemistry is actually pretty interesting. And if you think about it in the sense of like the perfection of Allah's creation, People probably don't like that because they don't want to take the class in the lab in particular. But then it is still amazing. Right? So chemistry is amazing, astronomy is amazing, biology is amazing, mathematics, physics. It's like essentially the language of God and creation. I mean, these things are incredible. So whatever it is, you spend time in it, and it should all be leading us back to Allah. At the end of the day, it should all be taking us back to Allah. So learning is component number 1. Okay? Component number 2 is growing. So, this ties into Sheikh Uthman's question. You have all this knowledge and things. What are you going to do about it? What does it mean? That's really the question of growth. The knowledge is useless if it doesn't lead to growth. One of the brothers in the masjid, he said something nice. From Saudi. We finished a book. We were studying it in the masjid, and he said, when I was back home, our Sheikh, whenever he would finish a book, he'd say, Allahumma ja'al hadha al-kitab lana la alayna. Ja'al hujjatan lana la alayna. He said, he would make this dua, oh Allah, make this book that we studied an evidence for us and not against us. This is knowledge in the end of the day. It can be an evidence for you, it can be an evidence against you. And so, the learning itself is coupled with this growth aspect. The growth of the tazkiyah aspect, which is going to lead to action, which is the third part. We're going to get there. But the growth is really the question of tazkiyah. So maintaining consistency, being serious about tazkiyah is a huge part of maintaining consistency. And again, as I said before, I think I said this, tazkiyah is essentially tawheed in an amali perspective. The active tawheed is the question of tazkiyah. Why? Because the question of tazkiyah is how do I purify my heart until it's at the most clean level so that it can be in absolute submission to Allah. So that's tawheed, right? To acknowledge your absolute submission to Allah. That's a process of spiritual development that has to occur. Now, there's 4 major categories of this development. Category number 1 is in acts of worship. So the ibadat that we normally do. This is the way that Imam al-Ghazali has the most famous book in Tazkiyah, which is Ihya Ulumuddin, the revival of the religious sciences. And he broke it up in these 4 parts. So part 1 is that we know the spiritual side behind the acts of worship that we do. Okay, so how do we bring our heart into these acts of worship? We do it through this type of learning and acting upon it. Why, when I make wudu, and the water drips from the limbs, then the sin drops with the water, that the prayer is an act of purification as well, and then it prevents us from bad deeds, and really perfecting my prayer, and how do I do that, and how do I actually physically engage in perfecting my prayer, and you guys already had a session on this. That really is an act of purification as well, of tazkiyah as well, and all of that as well for fasting, for giving charity, for hajj, so on. Second stage is then the acts of everyday interactions. So the mu'amalat. The tazkiyah and adab thing comes into this as well. So basically when I visit, what are the rights of brotherhood or sisterhood? What are the rights of a guest when they come to their host? How is the host supposed to take care of their guest? What does it mean to, when I visit someone in the hospital, for example, how do I deal with them? All of these things of daily interactions are also places where we grow in deepening our life around Islam. Deepening our life around Islam is growing in these personal interactions that we go through. And really forcing ourselves to do that which is right. It happens in a lot of funny things, and a lot of everyday little stuff that happens. There's chances to push the tazkiyah that are not as, I'll tell you maybe something that comes to mind. So say you go to someone's house, right? From the adab of visiting someone's house, from the manners of visiting someone's house, is that you don't look around their house. Okay, so for example, if you come into the home and you go into the living room and they give you a choice as to where you want to sit, the best thing to do, first of all, if they tell you where to sit, you sit where they tell you to sit. If they give you the choice of where to sit, you sit such that your back is to the rest of the house. Okay? So that way you're not looking around their business. And so what happens though if you're not in that kind of position? Maybe you're in a position where like, this is the rest of the house, and you're sitting like this. And the person's talking to you, right, in front of you. So every now and then, just out of human nature, you're going to have like a little bit of a tendency to look to the side because there's like this open territory that you haven't seen before, right? And you're just curious what it is. And every single time that happens, you're going to have to stop yourself and be like, no, actually, I'm not supposed to do that. This is this person's house. I'm going to control myself. It's a very simple example, right? But knowing those things in daily life really affects it after a while. How do I raise my voice? Am I too loud? Am I not too? Am I too soft? How do I knock on the door? All these things like they actually affect our keeping in remembrance of Allah. Right? What it is by knowing all those things, you are practicing keeping in the remembrance of Allah. So this is number 2. Number 3 and 4 are related, which is that they are getting rid of bad qualities and reinforcing good qualities. Oh wow. I didn't realize I was there. We don't need it. You guys are taking good notes. So the good qualities is basically to know things like courage, generosity, kindness, temperance, forbearance, all of these qualities that we're supposed to have, living them. So I know, for example, that I'm supposed to be patient. And I'm sure you guys have had an opportunity throughout this camp to force yourself to engage in some of these qualities. Right? So when you're late and Iyad makes you do 100 push-ups, you're a little bit frustrated. You're like, this is for the overall good. I'm just going to keep my mouth shut and do these push-ups. So there's an element of struggling against the self in that. And that goes for the good side and it goes for the bad side. So just as you have that in the good qualities, you also have it in the bad qualities. Someone might have a temper problem. Someone might have a jealousy problem. Someone might have a control problem, like they're always trying to control other people. Someone might have an arrogance issue. Someone might have a power, they're like always on power trips, whatever it might be. And these are, again, all actually issues that eventually work their way back to Allah. So for example, like jealousy. I don't understand jealousy. If you think about jealousy, like, okay, take a step out of the whole thing, think about jealousy. Let me package jealousy for you in a different way. I see this other person. Allah has given me a lot of things. Allah has given this person other things. I like that other stuff that Allah has given this person, and I'm not so pleased with what Allah has given me. So I wish that this other person would lose what they have so that I can have it. That's essentially what jealousy is. And the reason why I need that to happen is because there's like, subconsciously, think about it for a second. Isn't Allah capable of all things? Are there limitations on Allah? Is there any reason why Allah cannot give to this person and to you? Should not. So what is, like, it completely goes against Tawheed. Really, like a lot of these things, when you start thinking about them, they're all related to how we perceive Allah. How we perceive Allah, how we live that in our own lives, and so on. Of course, you're going to have times where you slip and you're like, there's 2 different types of jealousy in Arabic too, just to be clear. There's the good one and the bad one. So you can have good jealousy. For example, like good jealousy is you appreciate what the other person has, but you don't want them to lose it. You just wish you had it too. So like, someone's a hafiz, and you wish you were a hafiz. Or someone is very generous because they have wealth and they can spend in the way of Allah. The Prophet ﷺ specifically mentioned these 2. Someone that has a lot of wealth and they give it in the way of Allah, or someone that has memorized the Quran and they recite it in the day and the night, then these 2 people you can have jealousy over them, but it's the good one. And the bad jealousy is hasad, where you look at the person, you want them to lose actually what they have. Okay? So just to clarify, there are 2 questions.
Yeah, I was going to say, isn't it envy rather than jealousy? Jealousy.
Yeah, we get into this translation problem, but probably it's envy. I don't know, to be honest. I know that a lot of times when, I think I just had this conversation with someone. Was it my father? Were we just talking about this? Jealousy and envy and the words or something?
Long time ago.
The idea though is essentially that. Because I know, like, in a purely take Arabic out of my life perspective, we used to use jealousy like, I don't know, you want what that person has and it's not a good one. But technically there might be differences. I don't know. Yeah.
I mean, what if somebody finds themselves in a situation where they have negative thoughts about their brother, or they're kind of they start feeling jealous or envy, and then I don't know where there's kind of that check system that comes in place where they're like, what are you doing? Like, how do we kind of keep that other voice in our heads kind of stronger, like to keep us from being jealous or from having these negative qualities?
Yeah. See, this is, for me personally, why I also like learning. Everyone has different things, right? Like, my personal leaning is learning. Because every day when I pick up a book and I read about one of these issues, I'm reminding myself about why I need to keep this in the front of my mind and focus on this problem, whatever it might be, right? So, like, I used to really, I need to go back to it again, but my favorite chapter in Purification of the Soul books was always the chapter on the dangers of the tongue. And I would just read this chapter like over and over again. And some of the books have 30, 40 different dangers of the tongue, right? So you really need to think about them. But how do you keep it in mind? I think the learning is a portion of it because it's a constant reminder. But being around good people is also very important because it will come up in the course of discussions and they'll kind of check you sometimes. If you have that consciousness that allows you to come to the point where you have that pause, then you're actually in a good position. So you have the ability to deal with it. So what I'm saying is, if you come to a point where you kind of pause for a second and you say, wait, I'm jealous of this person, then you're in a good position because now you know you're in this situation. You can actually just, now there's the willpower, you know, you have to do what you have to do. But I think a lot of people, most of us probably don't have that. If we just do things we're not supposed to do and we don't have that sensitivity.
To answer how I think, when I get judged somebody, you might have something that he's getting tested for. So if I had it, I might not be capable of like handling that test that person is going through, or if he has more money, he has a lot of money, maybe that's a huge test for him. So I was envy from him that he has a lot of money. And yeah.
You don't have the whole picture necessarily.
Yeah, so it might be bad, or everybody has their trials.
Yeah, and this is also, this is good because part of what that is, what you're saying basically, is that Allah's wisdom is more than yours. Right? Allah's wisdom is more than yours. And Allah actually knows what's best. So some people, I know, there's some people, I won't put them on the spot, whenever you ask them to make dua for you, they say, may Allah give you what's best. Can you make dua that I get this new job? I'll make dua that Allah gives you what's best. Can you make dua that I get into this school? I'll make dua that Allah gives you what's best. This is, you might not know. For example, very personal example. There's no logical reason why I did not get into UCLA when I applied to UCLA. There's really not. So all these other people that got in there that didn't have the same stuff on paper that I had. You know, from like, it just was the case, right? And in retrospect, had I gotten into UCLA, there's no way I would have gone to UCSD. And my best friend growing up, who was actually the same as me, his father is from Pakistan, his mother is white, we didn't grow up Muslim, we were the same. He went to UCLA, joined a frat, did whatever he did. It's like a hedge fund manager or something in New York now, right? But I probably would have had like a messed up life. But I went to UCSD, I became a Muslim, like my future wife happened to also go to that university. There's all these things that happened that there's no way I could have known them. But if I looked at all those other people and been like, well, they went, I probably did at that time. But to think about, oh, they get to go to UCLA, I wish I was going to UCLA, I should have their spot, they should be going to UCSD. But Allah's wisdom is more. Allah's wisdom is more. Okay, any other questions on grow? The big thing about grow is essentially what you're doing here This is what makes it hard. So you have all of this theoretical knowledge and the learn side. And the grow side, you're basically taking all of that theoretical knowledge and forcing yourself to live by it. That's why it's so difficult. And that's why it doesn't stop. And that's why like lectures on sincerity are interesting every single time. Because every single day we have the same stuff that we're struggling with. And so you have to go through that constant tension that we live in. Okay, there was someone else raised their hand. Yes.
So what is a good way to measure growth, like test yourself? I don't know when your iman is going up and down, but like a personal example for me, like I used to, like when I first started becoming really practicing, I used to go to a lot of classes in my sajid. I used to dress very differently. Interaction with guys was absolutely none. Whereas now, like I work with guys, I have to interact with them. You know, colors are more acceptable now. Like all these different things, but then you still have those people who are like, well, like if you challenge any of those things, they'll say, well, you used to not like these things. Why did you change? Why did you become this? Whatever. And I consider it growth, but they consider it blah blah blah. And then your Islamic work starts turning into like secular work, so it's not the same. Like you're not doing what you used to do, but you still are doing for the sake of Allah, right? So you can't measure, you can't compare the two. It's not like I used to person, I don't person. It's like I used to do this, but now I do this. And then how do you, like what's a good way to know if you're growing or if you're actually like going back and reaching out or something?
Yeah. So this ties into the ending point about being together. But really, the best way to do that is to just be around good people. Good, sincere, nice, caring people that are concerned with Allah's pleasure. Those people will keep you in check. And those people will help you to understand when you might be slipping or when there might be issues or whatever it might be. The thing is, though, is that as you learn, there should be a sophistication of how you look at things. And that may result in realizing that how things were perceived before are not as, they're just not maybe right. I'll tell you a story with Sheikh Taha. When I was first a Muslim, and I was extremely strict about Sunnah. I was like basically South Asian. And so there was a time we had this. If anyone doesn't understand that reference, anyone not understand that reference? Okay, so like a lot of the India, Pakistan people, they're very strict on their Sunnah. That's what I mean, basically. They make it as if it's fun, which is, it's a beautiful thing. Alhamdulillah, until it starts messing with your understanding of life, which can be a problem. So I was very strict with this, and there was an event one night in the masjid, and Sheikh Taha then he led Maghrib prayer, and he got up after Maghrib, and he went to go to the multi-purpose room to make sure everything was in order for the event, right? And so he comes and he like taps me along the way, and he's like, yo, let's go. I need your help in the multi-purpose room. And I was like, okay, Sheikh, I'm just gonna pray Sunnah, and then I'm gonna come to the multi-purpose room. And he's like, he just looks at me, he's like, no, your Sunnah is in the multi-purpose room with me right now. That is actually where your Sunnah is. And then, you can do whatever you need to do later. So his point was like, sometimes there's, which doesn't mean you shouldn't pray Sunnah. He's not saying that. He's saying, this is something that I need you to do right now, and I need your help in this right now. So someone might choose to dress maybe a little bit differently. Does that mean that they're less religious? As long as the rules are still being followed, no. It doesn't mean it at all. Someone could choose to dress in a way that's perceived to be less religious, while still paying attention to the rules, and it is actually more religious. So I'll tell you a personal struggle, which I don't know if my wife would appreciate, but nonetheless. When did Muslimah start wearing jilbab? Oh, John? Probably. No, it was before this. 10th maybe.
Yes.
10th? I think 10th. So she started wearing jilbab really early. And that's what she understood. This is what you have to wear in order for it to be halal. This is the most halal thing that you can wear. You have to wear jizbab. So then you study and you study and you study and you study and you realize like actually the conditions are just that the clothes is loose and that certain things are covered. And if you were to think about that and then put it in the context of America, then if you can cover the same things that you need to cover while dressing in a way that is less strange for people that you deal with on a regular basis, then you could actually dress in a way that is technically, you could argue, is more Islamic, but people will look at it as less Islamic. Muslim people will look at it as less Islamic, right? So you see my point? Someone, there's any number of issues that might be like that. And there's the issue of fiqh of priorities, fiqh al-awlawiyat, that how do you balance between these things? What takes precedence? And that's its own study that we can't really get into right now. But yeah, so I guess what I'm saying is like, part of the maturation can be that ideas change. As long as you're truly still trying to do what Allah wants you to do, and you're following the rules of what's normatively known in Islam as the rules, you're in a good place. Okay, anything else about grow? Wow, you're right. Okay, go ahead.
Just quickly, what's the rate at which learning and growing takes place? Like how you do a lot of learning first and a bunch of growth and learning and growth?
Simultaneously. Learning and growing happen simultaneously. Because learning is, it's for you or it's against you. If you're not growing while you're learning, it's against you, basically. So that's why, it like became popular at some point to study Islam. That's really good. I mean, alhamdulillah, it's obviously good if people study Islam. But, it comes with consequences. So you're going to go and you're going to study and you're going to come back and have to be an imam or like a religious figure or stand in front of, it has consequences. It's not going to be easy. So growing should always happen at the same time. And there might be times when you actually lessen how much you're learning, because you come to terms with yourself and be like, you know what, I actually know a decent amount and I'm not living by it. So I'm going to spend more time in actually doing what I need to do. That might be something that you do as well. Might sometimes you need to slow down on it. Yeah. Like 4 minutes, so go ahead.
How do you know you're not being too rigid or you're not being too flexible? How do you know you're keeping the balance?
Realistically, you're always going to be being too rigid or too soft at different points, and you're probably not going to know. I mean, realistically, that's how it is. Unless you're one of those really fortunate people who manage to find someone who's actually reliable and can tell you straight up, like, I think you're being too rigid right now and you're being too soft right now. But it's very rare to be in that kind of situation. So what you do is, by exposing yourself to different ideas, to different people, to spending time with people who are pious and have experience and have been engaged in the community for a long time and all these type of things, you at least are like building up your ability to understand the gradients. And then sometimes you're going to make mistakes, that's okay. There was a lot of times when I was too hard on things. There was some times where I was too soft on things. That's the nature of life, it's going to be like that. Okay, I have to finish. Number 3 is give. So number 3 basically means that you have this knowledge and you have this growth that has occurred. This knowledge and growth that occurs when you put them together, then something should be coming out of it. Which is basically that your life should be contributing to the lives of others around you in some way. That can be in very small things like smiling or taking sticks out of the path. That can be in very big things like solving world hunger. Whatever it is, it's important. And whatever it is, we should be giving. If we do not give, then we're also there's the triangle of things that we have to worry about is not in order. And if you look at the beginning of the Prophet's revelation, you have learning, you have praying in the night, and you have warning people, which is giving in many ways, right? So you have all of these components there. There's learning and there's growth and there's giving always happening, so that it's not just selfish. People get in different ruts. Like maybe they end up in the learning side and they don't actually give back to their community. Or maybe they're in the giving side but they stop learning. Or maybe they're in the growing side, like man, they're praying, they're making dhikr, they're doing all of these things, but they don't actually, there's no learning. So eventually they start doing things that are off or whatever it might be, right? So all of these have to be in balance all the time. The closing point about that is that happens together. Like I said, learn, grow, give together. The thing that's going to help to calibrate that whole experience and to give us the support that we need in going through that journey is that we do it together. That you have a group of people that you can trust, that you can respect, that will have your back, that can support you. Sometimes it's hard to find those people. One of the things to do is to make dua, really. And then when you find them, hold on to them. Even Imam Shafi'i, he said, if you find someone that you really love for the sake of Allah, don't let them go. Because it's like something that's it's not so common. The other thing is they don't have to fit like the mold that you exactly want. Allah might give someone to you in your life that's outside of the mold that you're looking for. Right? Maybe you're used to hanging out with a certain type of people that have certain behavioral traits or qualities or whatever it is, and Allah puts someone in your life who's like totally not one of those people, but that person is good for you. And so then there's a choice of what takes precedence. Is it like being around cool people, or is it being around good people? And these are questions that we have to all go through. So do it together. And the last thing is that it happens as worship. All of this should not become secularized. Like we're just checking things off and getting them done or whatever. But all of this is about really trying to come closer to Allah, and trying to live lives that are valuable in the sight of Allah, so that when we meet Him, He can be pleased with us, inshallah. So this is the summary of that. Jazakumullah khairan. Yeah, I have 0 minutes left.
Takbir. Takbir. Takbir.
He said I can take one question.
What were Mongols like with the big chunky books?
Say that again, I couldn't hear you.
Like we were going off of this, the short books. I would like to know what are the big chunky books that you read?
In Sirah?
Yes.
The later ones that I said. So, only the first two were lighter. The latter ones are bigger. So, the Sealed Nectar is bigger, Martin Ling's is bigger, the Muhammad Man and Messenger is much bigger. There's also now Dr. Salabi's book on the Sirah is translated. I don't know what it's translated as, but you can look up his name, Salabi. It's 3 volumes in the English translation, so it's very substantial. I mean, if you know all of that about the Sirah, you know a lot. Should be good for life, inshallah.